Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 7 of Age Gap Love Story. We are Carrie and Alan, a married couple with a 32-and-a-half-year age difference, and we started this podcast and YouTube channel to offer information, support, and community to help make your age gap relationship successful. And today's episode is one that we've been teasing for a while. It's about basic financial planning for age gap couples who aren't married. So it's really for individuals. It's just some basic financial information. And we wanted to spend some time on this topic since finances are one of the top reasons why people disagree or why couples break up. And so we thought if you are not yet married, then, or even if you are married, I think some of this information, it will be helpful to you. And we're not offering financial advice. I have a master's degree in business administration in the realm of marketing, and Alan does have a professional background in financial management. But today's episode is just about general information. It's tips that we've picked up along the way. We're certainly not perfect in managing our finances, but of course, Alan has been experienced in managing his personal finance. I've learned a lot from him. And so we thought we would share some of those tips with you today. And specifically, we have 4 topics that we're going to cover. And that includes budgeting, saving, managing debt, and insurance. And the insurance part we may actually put in our next episode. So today is about kind of basic financial planning, and then we thought for episode 8, we would really jump into some of the issues, the financial issues specifically that can come up in age gap relationships. And I mean, that one is really going to be very specific, such as dealing with children from previous marriages and estate planning. And we will share, we are really an open book. We're willing to share all the types of planning that we have done for our futures and how we've managed like estate planning with Alan's children and things like that. So I want to jump right in and let Alan kind of talk about some of the overall issues and maybe some of the reasons why it's important to start thinking about financial planning as soon as possible.
Thank you, Carrie. Hi, everybody. As an introduction, I just want to preface that I have a lot of words of wisdom, as Carrie would say, from a long experience living life, and not all of them, I'm sure, are going to apply to you. But basically, I've found that the old expression, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound to cure, is so true. You know, you either pay on the front end by making an effort to get something set up and thereby avoiding problems on the back end. But if you don't do it on the front end, you're likely going to pay on the back end, and you could end up paying a lot more in the way of time, effort, aggravation. So that's just my overall thought. Another thought is you should look at a lot of things in life as a risk-reward situation. Is the risk of what you're doing worth the reward? And to avoid and minimize those risks in almost any area, whether it's good health or good finance, planning ahead certainly on an overall basis does reduce your risk. Now, in an age gap relationship, we could have a lot of different circumstances between the couple. The younger person may still be a student or early in their career. The older person may be financially very comfortable, or that older person may be on a limited income in retirement, or the older person may have spousal support, child support issues, or elderly parents that they have to look after. So there are a number of issues that really have to be considered and addressed as a disparity. And as Carrie said a moment ago, financial disagreements in almost any situation, any relationship, married or otherwise, can either create a long-term unpleasant situation or actually lead to divorce and a lot of heartache. So we definitely want to avoid those. I'll turn the microphone back over to Carrie now.
Yeah, so I thought we could jump into those four topics that we mentioned today, talking about budgeting. And Alan and I think fairly early on in our marriage, we set up a spreadsheet with a budget. But before we got married, we were both two, of course, independent people. We were both working. And so we both had incomes. And I think we kind of split it up a little bit, I guess, on kind of a stereotype where Alan, being the man, he paid for all our meals and things like that. So when we were dating, it was definitely more of a traditional kind of situation where Alan pretty much paid for everything.
I would hasten to add, though, that because Carrie was, as we discussed a moment ago, in the early part of her career and mine had matured, I had more disposable income. So I felt obligated to carry the brunt of the expense during our dating relationship. And again, I do want to emphasize that our discussion today is pre-marriage. This is when you're getting serious, when you're looking at putting your lives together and evaluating how each of you is going to address some of these big questions that we've covered.
So we did a little research on what's kind of the general rule for setting up a budget, and something we came across on a website that I will link to in the show notes. The organization is called, it's TIAA.org, and Alan said he'd heard of it. It used to be like a teachers union or something.
I believe it was a teacher's retirement fund, and they expanded substantially, and they're a very large, well-known organization, and they manage large amounts of money. So the bottom line is it's a credible website to get basic research on budgeting. However, there are many others. Suze Orman is also a good one, but if you Google budgeting, I'm sure you'll find others.
But this website, TIAA, had um, a rule called the 50-30-20 rule for budgeting. And I thought it made sense because it divides up your expenses or your income actually into three buckets. And so according to this 50-30-20 rule, 50% or less, of course, of your income goes to your necessities, which would include your housing expenses, paying off student loans, your utilities. These are like bottom line expenses that you must pay. And then the 30 rule would be 30% or less going to your what they call your nice to haves, which would be like entertainment, hobbies, eating out at restaurants, travel. Of course, nobody's really traveling much right now. And then the 20% or more, if possible, suggested going into your savings and paying down your debt.
One note of caution, for lack of a better word, to introduce here, and I believe we covered this in previous episodes. As you get to know what may be your future life's partner, you need to seek full disclosure. And I'm thinking of family members that I've had and people that I've known who have a secret aspect of their lives. Mm-hmm. And that could be a gambling issue, an addiction issue with alcohol or with narcotics. These can not only devastate somebody's possible earnings, but also the stability of their relationship on an overall basis. I had an uncle who lost his first wife and had a great deal of issue with debt because he was a chronic gambler and he hid it from his first wife, piled up a lot of debts, which led to their divorce. And it wasn't until he remarried and his second wife was a very powerful influence in his life, and she helped him pay down the debts, move away from the gambling addiction, addiction, but she knew about it because he disclosed it. So just be on the alert, and if some of these issues pop up later, they could be really devastating.
And I think also if you are in the beginning of a relationship, or even if you're not yet dating, you're a single person right now, I think the idea is that if you get your house in order, so to speak, you get your finances in order, and you feel confident that you can support yourself, and you're confident about your future, then I think it puts you in a better position to be with a future partner.
Along this concept of full disclosure to the extent that you can obtain it from your partner and be willing to make the disclosure about yourself, uh, I can give you an example of another couple that the wife, they were both working and they were both equal earners. In addition to a difference in general temperament, which began to become a real problem over the years, one of the two was actually a closet big spender and began to spend wildly on things that were not apparent to the other partner. And one day, the non-spending partner came home from work to find people at the house with a legal notice, a warrant to take away furniture that had been pledged as an asset against a loan that the spending partner had taken out. So, again, I don't mean to throw these negatives in there, but it's just best to be aware of them and discover them and address them. And if you find that a partner is elusive or is not willing to disclose things up front, or if you're not and you have issues, it will definitely come back and bite you.
And we did cover some of these tips. If you haven't listened to episode 4, tips for dating and getting serious, I think you might want to go back and listen to that episode, because we did talk about some of these issues about getting to know a potential partner, making sure there aren't any skeletons in the closet, so to speak. And also, I would say that it's not meant, we're not saying that you have to find somebody who's perfect or you have to be perfect. I think we've said this before, but it's one thing to acknowledge, maybe debt that you have that you're working to pay off, and it's another to lie about it or to try to pretend that it's not happening, because that's, I think, when things, when there's lying and covering up, then I think that can just, set a relationship on a really bad course. And I have seen that happen with my parents. And so I think when Alan and I got together, I also just wanted to mention that as the younger person, I think it's really important that you have your own skills and your own ability to make money. So it would have been very easy for me at the beginning of my career meeting Alan. It would have been easy for me to, well, I don't know if I could have quit my job, maybe, but not to have continued being able to make money. And I think that especially for, I just want to tell you for the younger listeners listening out there, if nobody has told you, that you are valuable and that you are worthy of making money, you have the ability to make money, I'm telling you that you have your whole life ahead of you. I'm sure you have some amazing gifts, and I would tell you to really cultivate those gifts, but just make sure that you have at least one skill that you can do to make money. And it doesn't matter what that is, whether it's a hairdresser, whether it's an accountant, whether it's being a CEO, but don't be dependent on other people to support you. So do what it takes to make sure that you have the ability to make money. So get your education and do an apprenticeship, do whatever it takes. So even if you become a mother, or you end up being, living the good life with your partner, just if things go awry, I want you to make sure to keep up your skill level and your licenses or whatever it is, so at any point you can make money. That's my little soapbox speech.
Yes, that's a very good soapbox speech. I agree 100%, in fact, 200%. And on that topic, remember, today is the first day of the rest of your life. Another little pearl of wisdom from the old timer. And a story is a perfect example of this, if I may download another life experience to you, or having associated with somebody that had this life experience. Years ago, I was in Las Vegas at a blackjack table. I think it was early in the morning because I'm an early riser, and virtually there was nobody else in the casino. It was very quiet, and I was the only one at the table with this lady who was the blackjack dealer. And we began chatting, and in those days, and maybe still, they would have their name on the tag, first name, and where they were from, because most of the people that worked in Las Vegas or do work there have come from someplace else. And this lady was from Phoenix, Arizona, and so I was asking her, well, how did she come to move to Las Vegas? And she said, well, she said it's kind of a long story, but the bottom line is that she said she had a really good job working for some department of a county somewhere in the state of Arizona. Great retirement plan, a great prospect, solid situation, not worried about layoffs or cutbacks. And then she met this guy who kind of swept her off her feet. He was older, and he was going to be setting up a business in Las Vegas, and he was moving there, and so they became very romantically involved. Anyway, the bottom line is she moved to Las Vegas. His business turned out to be sort of pie in the sky. He dumped her, and she was stuck in Las Vegas, having given up this well-paying job and her seniority. And there she was in Las Vegas on her own. And at that point in time, she just took a job as a blackjack dealer to sort of get along, and was very remorseful about this change that she had made in haste. You know, there's an old expression, sin at leisure, repent at haste. So don't make a hasty decision. Romance sometimes can burn away very quickly.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking back actually to our early relationship, and we ended up, after I finished graduate school and Alan and I got married, we did move to a town where the jobs were really hard to find. And I tried to find jobs that would work for me, and they just didn't work out. So that was actually what prompted me to start my own business. And I'm really fortunate that that has worked out, and I've been able to do um, what I love for the last, gosh, over 10 years now. So I'm not sure if I had heard this advice when we were first dating. I think we probably wouldn't have moved out of the city because the jobs were so much easier to come by. Obviously, things have worked out for me and for us, and I do have my own income. But I guess I'm trying to tell other people who might be in this situation just to maybe be a little bit more careful.
I would again hasten to add that, uh, not being immodest, that because I had made a commitment to Carrie to make sure that she would be secure, that, and being a stand-up guy, that she did not really have to worry, even though jobs were scarce. So I think it was with that confidence and assurance and support that she was able to move forward and begin her own career, and even prior to that, actually get through graduate school and not have to worry about where her next meal was going to come from. So I think it paid off because Carrie did, check me out, and her mother was very serious in asking me about my intentions and my background, which I was very forthright in explaining to her. And also, as we became more serious and Carrie became dependent on me, I had the financial wherewithal to take out a term life insurance policy with Carrie being the beneficiary. So if anything happened to me, she would have money to adjust and find her own career and sort of get her footing.
That's true. I'm thinking more back to, because this was a while ago. I mean, we're talking over 20 years ago now. or 15 to 20 years ago when all this happened. And also, we're going to get into this more in our episode 8, but Alan and I do have a prenuptial agreement, and it protects both of us. And in the sense that Alan wouldn't have to give up his financial security if we had gotten divorced or get divorced. And also it protected me because I did give up moving out of the city. I did give up the potential for a higher, I guess, management type of position, which I would have been qualified for, but it's hard to find in a small town.
Just a little quick leap forward on the topic of prenups, which we'll get into in a future episode. There are a lot of ins and outs, and neither one of us are legally qualified to advise you on that. But the way I set mine up, which was actually my idea, not that of our legal counsel, was to set it on a phased basis. So the longer we were together, the more of my assets Carrie would be entitled to, and we've actually eclipsed that by quite a bit now. So the prenup is basically inoperative, but at the time it was extremely important and reassuring for both of us to know where we would stand.
So let's get back to our budgeting. We talked about the 50-30-20 rule, and then just as kind of a practical way of managing your budget, I'm sure that there are lots of apps out there where you can manage your expenses, and I think that's an excellent thing to do. I'm not super duper detail oriented. I don't really like tracking, and Alan is also kind of a big picture guy. So we don't really love details. I mean, in some ways we do, in some ways we don't. But I think it'd be great for somebody who's just getting a handle on your budget and your expenses to do it for 1 month at least, at the minimum. And so then you can see exactly where you are spending and where you can start trimming things if you need to fit into that 50-30-20 bucket, which had to do with your income.
On the topic of budgeting, as Carrie said, you don't really have to track every penny once you set up a spreadsheet. And there are probably budgets that you can download online that are already pre-formatted. So all you have to do is adjust the categories and start to plug in the numbers. But a lesson you might learn from the business type budgets is they have an estimated or budgeted amount, and then they track what was actually spent within those budget categories, and then you adjust them for the next month or the next 3 months or whatever, so you can see if your estimate was correct or if it was way off target.
So I think we should jump into the savings, which would fall into that 20% of your income is recommended, that and this savings account would go towards your retirement. It can also go towards your emergency fund. And I think an emergency fund is more relevant than ever, considering that so many people have lost work due to this pandemic that we're living through. And according to the kind of basic financial research advice that I found online, an emergency fund really should cover 3 to 9 months of your living expenses. And so if you really add up all your living expenses, 9 months is quite a hefty little sum. But I think we can all agree that if we had been able to predict, for instance, this pandemic and so many people being out of work, we probably all would have taken that emergency fund idea a little bit more seriously.
One aspect of finances, when you do decide to get married, think long and hard about spending a lot of money on a wedding. From our personal experience and from many people I've talked to, whether it's an age gap relationship or not, is that they spend a huge amount of money, even go into debt on their weddings, because it's something usually that every bride wants. And I can understand the emotional aspect of that. But looking back several years, and again, I've heard this from many, many married people, they often regret the amount of money they spend on a wedding for a number of reasons, primarily because most of the people they have at their wedding, particularly if it's medium to large, they don't see as time goes by. Your life changes, their lives change, and it's like a photograph that fades. And I've talked to so many people that say, gee, I wish I went through a drive-through wedding chapel in Las Vegas, or got married by a justice of the peace or my local minister or rabbi or whatever, and went on a cruise with that money. So just think about that. It's easy to spend and it's hard to save. Or as my mother used to say, bless her little heart, it's easy to buy and it's hard to sell.
Yes, that's a lesson that Alan and I have learned a lot in our relationship, because we're like anybody else. We get excited. We hear about a great deal on a trip, or I don't know, lots of things, and then it's easy to bust out your credit card. But then when that bill comes at the end of the month, don't forget. So ideally, you'd be paying your credit card bill off every month. And we can get into that when we get into debts.
I just have to say really quickly that, and I'm sure most of you know this, credit card debt is the worst kind of debt, maybe other than these places where you borrow against your paycheck or your car. But the interest rates are horrendous, 15, 18, 20, 25%, huge. You'll never pay off the debt you own. Avoid or pay down credit card debt, please.
That's Alan's public service announcement. But as we were talking about budgeting with the 50-30-20 rule, that 20% which goes towards savings and paying down debt, this also includes your retirement savings. And so, saving money can really not be overemphasized in how important it is. We're talking about paying off debts, having an emergency fund, and saving for retirement. These are really important things. And so if you're thinking about spending $20,000 on a wedding or buying a new car, I think both of us want to give you caution and tell you to really think about spending money unless you have paid off all your debts and you've set up a great retirement fund, you have that emergency fund. Just be really cautious about spending money that you really don't need to spend. I know when I was early in my career, I had a crappy car, but it worked, and it got me from my apartment to my job. But I think I got a raise, and so I was talking to one of my colleagues, and she was a friend of mine as well. We had become friends, and I was kind of just saying, oh, I really wanted a new car. And I just remember her saying, like, no, Carrie, your car works. Don't, because I was, of course, I didn't have the money to pay it full in cash. I was going to take out a car loan. And I just remember her cautioning me. She was older than me, and she was a mother, and I really appreciated that advice because I'd already had like $20,000 in student loan debt that I was paying off, and I was, making less than $30,000 in my first job out of college, and of course paying rent, and I had no financial support from my family. And I didn't know. Nobody was there to tell me except for her to caution me on taking on more debt. And I'm so glad I didn't, because then when I wanted to go to graduate school just a few years later, I think it would have been more difficult and maybe would have made me not go to graduate school if I had had more debt. And of course, I'm of the opinion that education is extremely important. So student loan debt, you can look a little bit differently from credit card, well, a lot differently from credit card debt or other types of debt. If you're investing in your future, that's a little bit different than, well, it's a lot different than buying a new car.
And 2 points. One is don't count on Social Security. It will not provide enough money for your retirement. And second point is I remember a commercial that was pretty widespread years ago by a retirement company. It started off, actually it was humorous, it was serious, but still humorous, where it showed a fellow in a helicopter and he was showing this really expensive watch on his wrist. And the supposed funny part was it was a commercial for a watch when it really wasn't. And the watch was advertised as being able to take extreme abuse, being able to go underwater. It had 18 different functions, moon phases, times around the world, all these sort of things. And it was only like $6,000. And then there was a different voice, and it said, or you could invest $6,000 in your retirement account, and at the end of 25 years, it would be worth X amount of money, which would be a lot more. So that's the way you have to kind of look at things. Again, it's back to either, you pay now, you pay later. You pay on the front end or you pay on the back end. In 25 years, when you want to retire, are you even going to still own an expensive watch? Or are you going to still have your photo album from your wedding? Are you still going to have that expensive trip that you really didn't need to take? So, when you get older, it's going to be harder to make money. So think about those things. Think ahead.
Right. So I think at the risk of sounding like we're, I don't know, being bossy or whatever, I do think we should talk a little bit about managing debt, because I'm certain that a lot of people do have debt, and it's not to be ashamed about, but again, it's something to address and to deal with. And so I just did a little bit of research on managing debt, and this website had 8 kind of basic tips for managing debt. And the first one is know who and how much you owe. So I think that's really important, as opposed to just kind of having this black cloud above your head and feeling bad whenever you think about, the money that you owe. Like, let's bring it to the forefront. Let's actually deal with it. That's the first step. Let's make a spreadsheet. What's the organization where we owe the money and how much do we owe? And then get it all out there, and so you know exactly what you're dealing with. And then the second tip was to pay your bills on time each month, because having late fees tacked on to the debt you already owe is not going to help you.
As we discussed earlier, having the same level of awareness that you're going to have about yourself based on these points that Carrie made, you should have about your potential partner. What obligations do they have?
And then number 3 on this list of how to manage debt is to create a monthly bill payment calendar. Now, I'm not sure if this is maybe they're having you do this electronically just so nothing gets missed, or maybe it's so you have an idea of which expenses are going out when during the month. But I think just having your expenses and your debts organized is a good idea. And then number 4 is make at least the minimum payment. Now, I'm sure if Alan jumped in right here, he would say pay off your whole debt, especially credit card debt, immediately. But then I, proposed to him, or I was thinking, well, like when I was younger and when I was just working and I did have some credit card debt, well, if I was either going to pay my rent or pay off my credit card, I couldn't pay the whole thing off in 1 month. So, but making at least the minimum payment is a good start. Ideally, making sacrifices, so not going out to eat, so you can pay a little bit more than the minimum payment would be better.
Skip that special latte at Starbucks. Things like that, frankly, are frivolous. And again, going back to that watch commercial I mentioned earlier, whatever you're spending every month at some place like Starbucks or a local restaurant that you think you deserve because it's very elegant and you've worked hard for that week or that month, think about what the cost of that restaurant would have been if you were to multiply it over like a 25-year period and had invested that money and even were able to get a 5% over the long-term return when you don't want to work anymore. Was that expensive lunch or the latte really worth it?
Yes, and as somebody who's my expertise is in nutrition, and so I make most of our meals at home. And especially since the pandemic started, we did have a restaurant budget, and we have not been eating out at all. And not only has it made it easier to manage our weight, but we've pretty much cut out several $100s from our monthly budget by not eating out. Although we would like to support our local restaurants because some of them, I mean, most of them are small businesses and we really like the owners and we think they're doing amazing work. Um, it's so much more budget friendly to buy the ingredients and make food at home than going to restaurants.
And we have lost weight, and at home you know the ingredients that you're putting into your food. You know, not that all restaurant food is bad, but it's commercial food. And if you buy your own food, you know exactly what you're getting. As you may be aware, Carrie has another blog and website and YouTube channel called Clean Eating Carrie, where she makes these nutritious
Clean Eating Kitchen.
recipes. Clean Eating Kitchen, excuse me. Um, so, if you want to look at that to get an idea to make your dining at home a little more exciting and economical, there's the thought.
So the next point is decide which debts to pay off first. And I think, Alan, I'm just going to put words in your mouth and say that you see which debt has the highest interest rate, and that would be the priority to pay off first. And I would also say too that I believe that some of those interest rates are negotiable, and you should make an attempt to contact your credit card and ask for a lower interest rate. And that can save you a lot of money. And it's better in your pocket than in theirs. And then the next one is pay off collections and charge offs. I don't know what charge offs are. Do you?
No.
I think a collection, though, is more, that's when it goes to a court. Is that right?
Yes, a lot of times institutions where you owe money will basically hire a collection company, and they then will be in charge of collecting that debt, and they get a percentage, whatever they collect from you, and the rest of it goes to the lender. And a lot of these collection companies can be really unscrupulous. They can call you and drive you nuts. They can pester you to the point where you just want to pay them to get off your back. So actually, before something is at the point where it goes into collections, you want to address that debt.
Because you can get into legal trouble too, right?
Yeah, yes, they can put like what's known as a garnish, or legally they can attach your income or other your salary or other income you have, and they get a piece of it till the debt's paid off. And if you're employed and they attach your salary, it's going to make you look bad with your employer as basically being an irresponsible person.
I want to tell you the story of the one time I had a collections against me. I went home to my mom's house for a weekend or something, and we rented a movie from Blockbuster. I rented a movie. And so at the end of the weekend, I was headed back to school, I think, or to where I was living. I think I'd already graduated and from college. And so I asked my mom to return the movie to Blockbuster. It was under my name. And so I just assumed that the movie got returned. This is back in the days of VCR tapes, or it could have been a DVD, but I'm pretty sure it was a VCR. And so then a couple months later, I got this collections notice, and it was for some, random movie and that we had rented. And I was like, what? I couldn't believe it. And I didn't remember that I had asked my mom to return it, but I just assumed that I had returned it because I wouldn't have just kept a Blockbuster video. And so I think I ended up just paying for it because obviously I was scared. I'd never had a collections notice arrive at my house before, and it was so ridiculous. I had to pay $50 for some idiotic movie. And then, so I paid it off, $50 for stupid VHS. And then a few months after that, my mom told me, oh, I found this movie under my car seat. Yes, so that's my little story about my collections experience. But yeah, I remember the letter was very scary and mean, so I paid it off immediately. So point number 7 in managing debt is to use your emergency fund to fall back on. This is what your emergency fund is for. If you lose your job, you have, you know, some unfortunate accident where you have a medical expense that's not covered by insurance, something just unexpected happens that you don't have money immediately to pay for. But this is exactly why you need to have an emergency fund. And if you do have an emergency fund and you're having credit card debt because of something unexpected, that would be a case to use your emergency fund to pay off your credit card.
Right, and once again, before you buy those really expensive Nike sneakers or that really elegant dress, or whatever the case may be, think about these issues that we're covering. And forgive me for beating you over the head, but Carrie said on this conversation, as is the case with many of the parts during our podcast, she wants me to talk to you, our listening audience, as if I'm talking to a close family member, perhaps my daughters, and giving them advice. So this is how we're sort of expressing our feelings and what we know on the topic, and other information that we've gathered from others that have knowledge on these various topics. We just want you to think long and hard, because again, remember, as I said earlier, today is the first day of the rest of your life, and you just don't want to put yourself in a predicament, either on your own or relying on somebody else who puts you in that predicament.
Yes, and I would say I'm kind of imagining if somebody had given me this advice when I was 20 years old, I think I would have appreciated it. So I guess Alan is thinking about advice he would give his daughters or his grandchildren, and I'm thinking about advice that I wish somebody had given to me when I was young. And so the last point in managing debt is to use a monthly budget to plan your expenses. And I think this kind of wraps up everything we've been talking about, that when it comes to finances, you need to plan, you need to be measured, you need to think about how you're spending your money, you need to make sure that you're making money as well as you can, and be mindful and be educated, and hopefully things will work out for you. And I think what Alan said about planning on the front end or the back end, or what is it?
Paying the penalty on the back end.
Paying on the front end or the back end. It really, that advice has really made so much sense for me in my life. And I see it almost on a daily basis in silly little things. If I think about how we're going to be having our meals, rather than waiting to the last minute and we're starving and make worse decisions, or just little things. And so, your finances that's not a little thing. And so if you spend some time thinking about it, it really is going to benefit you later on in life.
Yes, so it's basically using common sense. However, I have to caution that with the words that Mark Twain used many years ago, and that is, common sense is not so common. So some people have to work to develop common sense, and we hope to the extent that we can, we're moving you in that direction. So we wish all of you well. We're always open for questions or comments, and we welcome hearing from you in any way, shape, or form. So be well, and our hearts are with you.
And I just want to say that this topic of insurance, we're going to cover in episode 8. Episode 8, which is the next episode, will get more into the nitty-gritty of personal finance in an age gap relationship. Today's episode really focused on the basics, whether you're single or you're in a relationship or not. And next week, we're going to get into the nitty gritty, and we'll cover insurance in detail then, because there are some really important issues to consider. So we thank you for listening or watching. We hope that you leave a comment, that you subscribe, that you rate us on Apple Podcasts, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Hugs and kisses.